G'day, my name is Gracelin Baskaran. I'm the director of the Critical Mineral Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington, D.C. Today, I'm joined by Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources, Geoff Pyatt. Ambassador Pyatt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having the conversation.
While we're incredibly disappointed we can't make it to IMARC this year, we were very honored to accept the invitation to deliver an address. So with that, I guess here we go. It's an election year, and people often ask me what this means for U.S. mineral security interests. The reality is that critical mineral security is one of the most bipartisan issues in Washington, D.C. Both Presidents Trump and Biden issued executive orders to build mineral security to strengthen national and energy security and economic competitiveness. There has been a global recognition of the importance of net zero ambitions. This has had a direct impact on forecasted demand for key critical minerals. Modeling undertaken by the IEA in 2020 showed that we would go from needing roughly 7 million tons of critical minerals in 2020 to nearly 150 million tons by 2050. Mining companies saw sunshine in the years to come. In fact, at the beginning of 2021, JP Morgan analysts took a bullish view on minerals and metals, suggesting that the world had likely entered its fifth commodity supercycle since the early 1900s. A supercycle, by definition, spans at least 10 years. But today, cobalt, nickel, and lithium prices are nearly at 4-year lows. What we didn't see coming were the exogenous shocks that followed the Paris Agreement. They had a significant impact on global minerals demand and depressed private sector mining activity. A quick look at what's driving this. First, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which neither you nor I expected. We saw an unprecedented amount of fiscal support go to businesses and households, which drove up demand and prices, triggering inflation. In response, central banks worldwide raised interest rates. Here in the U.S., the Fed raised interest rates 11 times in 2022 and 2023 to rein it in. When interest rates are high, people buy less things like cars, computers, household appliances, and luxury goods. Data shows an inverse relationship between interest rates and commodity prices. The higher the rates, the lower the base metals prices. We saw this particularly on electric vehicles. I'm from Detroit. I love the automotive industry. However, until March 2023, dealerships sold EVs faster than gasoline-powered vehicles. But when the Fed raised interest rates to 5% back in April last year, a significant divergence emerged. Your gasoline-powered vehicle began selling faster than EVs, which were $52,000 on average. By the end of 2023, the EV took nearly 70 days to sell in the US compared to 42 days for a gasoline-powered vehicle. Second was the slowdown of the Chinese economy. 5 years ago, many of us thought the Chinese economy was too big to fail. But growth over the last 2 decades was remarkable. Between 2000 and 2009, GDP growth rates were between 5.6 and 13.6%. It was the biggest off-taker for the world's base metals. But China's economy has slowed down quite considerably, and some of these challenges are structural in nature. High levels of local government debt, a collapsing real estate market, high youth unemployment. In 2022, China's economy grew just 3%. This was the second lowest since 1991, only behind the COVID-19 pandemic year of 2020. And in 2023, most of the world was still raising interest rates, but China was cutting theirs. Data from 2024 showed that China was actually starting to experience a decline in consumer prices, which we call deflation. April 2024, Fitch downgraded China's economy from neutral to negative. China's economy is no longer the world's biggest engine of growth, and instead, muted demand will affect minerals-intensive goods and prices. The IMF recently raised alarm on China's fiscal situation and noted its economic outlook was tilted to the downside. And finally, we've seen market manipulation, and this has been particularly felt in Australia. Despite low demand, Chinese government-backed firms are ramping up production, which is putting downward pressure on commodities prices and forcing Western companies to close. For example, Indonesia's nickel production has rapidly ramped up and is contributing to a global nickel surplus and a resulting decline in prices. Between 2021 and 2022, Indonesia's nickel production increased by 48%, and in the following year by another 29%. This oversupply has impacted prices and the profitability of major mining companies and created uncertainty about the future of nickel markets. This has forced closure of nickel mines in Australia and New Caledonia. So this brings us to a place of where we are today. We know that creating resilient, secure mineral supply chains is of utmost importance to our national security, energy security, and economic competitiveness. But the private sector is hesitant. They have fiduciary responsibility to their environment, to their shareholders, in an environment of price volatility. Private mining sector activity is nearing a 4-year low. Of course, we know copper is the exception. Copper markets are booming. It's a necessary material for advanced technologies that make up the global economy. Infrastructure, clean energy technology, electronics, automotives. Copper wires connect our electrical grids, integrated circuits, and telecommunication systems. It's the second most widely used material in weapons platforms by weight. It's vital for the modern economy. Copper demand is expected to grow not only because of renewable energy, but also growing population, urbanization, artificial intelligence boom. In order to meet net zero emissions, the Biden administration goals, annual copper supply would need to double by 2035. The AI industry is putting more pressure. Data centers that process AI applications could demand up to 200,000 metric tons of copper per year by 2025, adding another 2.6 million metric tons to the copper deficit in 2030. So what do we need to do? A couple quick recommendations before we turn it over to the real expert and Assistant Secretary Pyatt. First, governments need to step in and create incentives for the private sector investment, provide loan guarantees and concessional financing to reduce the cost of capital. This is particularly true for junior mining companies, and the U.S. has made a lot of headway in creating these government partnerships to incentivize that investment in recent years. Second, we need to focus on building responsible mining practices to reduce the friction between government, mining companies, and indigenous communities. We have an obligation to minimize the negative health and environmental externalities for the mining sector. Third, we need to invest in recycling. I once asked a friend in the mining industry, how much do we need to mine? His answer, as little as possible. We need to build our recycling capacity in the circular economy. And finally, we need to work together, and not necessarily in just a historical friend-shoring way. We need old friends and new friends. We will not meet the growing demand for minerals alone. We need to work with countries in places like Africa, Asia, and Latin America, given their deep mineral reserves, much of which are unmapped and undertapped. But we need to create a more mutually beneficial model of mining to ensure countries are benefiting from their resources in an equitable manner. With that, you've heard far too much from me, and I'm going to turn it over to Ambassador Pyatt.